welcome to the 416 podcast. This is the interview series, and today we're sitting down with Martin Johnson, and we've been able to visit with them through this weekend and this week a little bit. And so they've had us in their home a couple of times, and there's a little pitter-patter of dog paws going by us right now, but we're excited, and thank you for sitting down with us. We just wanted to talk a little bit about the work that you guys have been involved in for a number of years.
Sure.
And we'll get to the YouTube side of that here in just a moment, but we wanted to, you guys have worked in mission work, you've worked with Freed Hardeman, and so just kind of want to talk a little bit about, but to start with, maybe tell us a little bit about who you are and a little bit of your background, and maybe how you were introduced to the church.
Sure. Yeah, so, my name is Martin Johnson, and our family, right, Julie is my wife, Sarah is my daughter, and Seth is our son. And so I did not grow up in the church in any way, shape, or form. Grew up out in the world doing the world's things, right? Was introduced to the church, though, by a girl. And through a long string of events, finally was baptized into Christ. And through that, met Julie. And we ended up getting married in 2001. 2001, she says. But we got married in 2001. And from there, we went to preaching school. And I did go to Sunset Preaching School, or Sunset International Bible Institute. And then from there, like I was a new Christian at the time and didn't feel ready to go into mission work or go into like a local work right away. Just was too immature, even though I was probably like 26 years old at the time. But as far as the faith goes, I didn't feel ready. So we ended up doing an internship with Brother Guy Orbison in Durango, Colorado. And that was a 2-year internship that we did there before we went to Indonesia. And so spent 2 years with him, and that was very intense, like it maybe even more intense than preaching school. It seemed like we had to prepare 2 Bible classes and 2 sermons every week, and then we also had Greek classes on top of that. But we didn't have Friday really, because Friday was the day that he reviewed our outlines. So he had 3 interns at the time. And we were on the preaching and teaching rotation with the congregation, but with 3 interns, him as the preacher there, plus an associate preacher. There wasn't a lot of opportunity, to preach in the congregation. So we were all on a rotation there, but every Friday he would sit down and he'd have your outline, you printed it out for him, and he'd be marking it up, and he'd be asking you, like, why'd you use this verse? Why'd you say it this way? You misspelled this word.
Nice.
But it was great, although super intense. And anyway, so from there we did end up going to Indonesia, and we went to the island of New Guinea, which is the island of New Guinea is kind of split in half. You got half of it's Papua New Guinea, and then the other half is Papua, Indonesia. And so we went to Papua, Indonesia, and I worked with a small school of preaching there. So Indonesia is really strict on how they allow mission work to happen in Indonesia. And they wouldn't give permission for a school to be established in Papua unless it served people who were undereducated, basically. Right? And so our school accepted anybody that could read and write. Like that was the standard. And then it was in a village as well. And so it had to serve a particular area within the province. It could take students from all over, but it had to be in a certain area, which was a very remote area, and it had to basically take anybody. And so, which was good though, because we were able to take students that wouldn't be able to go someplace else, right?
Sure.
Because they didn't have the education that would have been required to go someplace else, right? To get a higher education.
I would think it would have afforded some opportunities too in
sure.
those remote locations, for obviously the gospel to.
That's right.
And so.
Yeah, and so anyway, so we were there for about 4 years or so. The school ended up losing its funding. The director of the school returned back to the States, and then we moved to a different part of Indonesia for a few months until we ended up coming back to the States. And so about 4.5 years or so, we were in Indonesia, working there, speaking in Indonesian, teaching in the Indonesian language. And when we came back to the States, we kind of wanted to further my education, right? Because I wasn't wasn't really satisfied like with the level of education that I got at Sunset. And so we ended up going to Fried Hardeman and then getting a bachelor's in Bible and a master's in ministry there before moving to Moab, Utah, where I was preaching for the church there. While we were in Moab, we were also working on a way to get back to Indonesia because the visa process is like super complicated, expensive. You need sponsors from Indonesia to get the visa and all of that. So we were working on that for a couple of years, and finally we got a visa to return and actually work in Indonesia. And we went to the island of Java, to the city of Yogyakarta, and did a church plant there.
Okay.
And so we worked with a local brother who moved from another island, and he had gone to the preaching school that was in Lampung, which is associated with Memphis.
Okay.
And then, so he had gone to that preaching school. He was working in another island. He came to where we were to work with us. Part of the law in Indonesia is you're really supposed to work. When you're working there, you're supposed to replace yourself, basically. Right. And so part of that, he came, he worked with us, and then our goal was to leave, right, eventually. So we left in about 5 years in, and came back to the States where we went to taught at Fried Hardeman, the missionary residence program there for a year before moving up here.
I got you.
That's a long story.
No, that's okay. That's a good background. So was that in connection then with maybe the Hatchers?
With the school in Lampung, yes.
Okay, that's
with the
what I was
Hatchers,
thinking.
right.
Yeah,
and then, but we didn't, that was on a completely different island, far away. Indonesia is huge, like east to west, it's longer east to west than the United States, right? And so if you were in Papua, say Seattle to where we were in Papua would have been someplace out in the Atlantic Ocean. I mean, like,
crazy,
it's really big, Right. So the school over there in Lampung kind of, they were doing their own thing on their own island, and then we were on a different island doing our own thing, but because of the students that come out of there, right, there's a lot of intermingling and stuff with students that, allow the church to have like a unity within it.
And I had not thought about the fact that they were, over there doing that work until you mentioned that particular area, and I was like, that's got to be the Hatchers,
Right.
So, and I'd heard that they had gone back, and I interviewed last year Barry, their son.
Oh, okay.
And so, and he takes trips back over there, but I think they were going back over there to hopefully set up another. Somebody that was over that school. And
and so the school's actually moved from Lampung on the island of Sumatra to, it's close to Manado on the island of Sulawesi. So they moved the school up there.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So you guys moved into this area.
Yeah.
And with what purpose in mind?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, the first purpose was to help the church here, right? And then because
we might want to tell them where we are.
Oh, we're in Sandpoint, Idaho, right? We're about an hour away from the Canadian border.
That's right.
In North Idaho, and so the first purpose was to help the church here, and then the second purpose was to build a home base for our family, and so we moved onto a piece of raw land, forest. And we started cutting down trees, and we lived in tents for about 5 months while we got kind of like a shell built that would hopefully keep us warm for the winter.
I gotcha.
Yeah.
So do y'all do Feast of Tabernacles every year? Kind of as a reminder?
That would be funny, but no. Yeah.
I just had to throw that in there. So, all right. So, and you guys moved in here, and one thing that's been, when we were talking the other day, I knew that you had a YouTube channel from when you were in Indonesia.
Right.
And so that, I guess that started, is that when you started that, when you moved over there?
Yeah, so we started with YouTube, which is kind of like our main, I guess it's our main outreach ministry, right? I mean, we work with the church and we outreach there, but also through YouTube.
Yeah.
Since moving up here to Sandpoint, there's been over 20 people that have been baptized that we've met through YouTube.
Yeah.
And so it's been a great outreach ministry in that way. But we started it in Indonesia, and the funny thing is that we started it to share with our friends and family back home, like what Indonesia was like, right? But they didn't seem to really care that much, and but the Indonesian people really liked it a lot.
Yeah.
They like to see foreigners in their country eating their food, speaking their language, loving their country.
Right.
And with that, then the channel really started to grow, and we had an opportunity to meet all kinds of people while we were in Indonesia, and even like we were on national TV, like interviewed on national TV in Indonesia. I got to speak at YouTube sponsored events for creators and like be one of the panel speakers for those events, and visit the YouTube Google headquarters in Singapore and stuff like
cool.
that. And so we started that channel, which at the time was called Riding Java, because it was a moto vlog channel. I put a GoPro on my helmet, and like we drove around, because like motorcycles were our main form of transportation. And so, and then I would talk. There's a microphone in my helmet and tell stories and talk about different things. But it eventually evolved into just kind of what we were doing on an everyday basis. It wasn't a Bible channel by any means. It was more of a way to share Indonesian culture and the food with other people. But then it turned into a way to show Indonesian people that we like their food and stuff.
Right.
Yeah. But from there, we learning the language. We already knew the language, but it was difficult to find people who would correct you when you said things that were maybe not the best, and just like if you were learning Spanish and you had a Spanish friend, or he probably wouldn't correct every sentence that you say. So, you should have said this, you should have said that, because he can understand you, you can understand him, and you're having, you're living life.
Right.
And so that's how it was, even with people within the church there. And so we decided to start another channel where I spoke Indonesian on it. And then I would ask them to correct my Indonesian in the comments. And so that allowed people then to really like nitpick, kind of a little bit, and try to improve my Indonesian that way. But that channel really, really started taking off, because now we weren't speaking English in Indonesia. We were speaking Indonesian, and then they really liked that. And it really started to grow a lot faster than the other channel.
That's cool. So you certainly had a connection then, obviously working in YouTube, figuring out how to best kind of put it out there, and of course the video side of that, the audio side of that, just trying to probably, I'm sure, make a better setting, try to do all those things, and so that's been going for a while. And so y'all move up here to 7 acres of just woods, forest. And start living here, start developing this property, and we're sitting in their beautiful home.
Yeah, it's a lot different than it was 6 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And so of course we'll have all the links. So if you haven't been following their channel, definitely need to do that. But I love the idea of using that. Obviously to benefit the kingdom.
Right.
And I know that last year, I think you told me, Freed, you spoke on, how members can just get started in a way that they might. So speak to that a little bit, because I think that's important in what you're doing here. It gives you opportunity. You said 20 people have been obviously influenced to obey the gospel through this, and I'm sure that'll continue to grow. And that's amazing for an area that's where we are. And so you start thinking about the church. We're not in the Bible Belt. No,
so we're far away. We're like at the other end where the holes are.
Yeah, way far away. And so, it's beautiful up here. And the area is amazing. And start thinking about the culture of people and how you're making inroads to be able to have that opportunity to preach the gospel, and so a little bit about kind of how that really has kind of taken off.
Okay, sure. So, when we moved up here, we had like our life savings basically that we'd saved up, and we used that to purchase the property. At the time, like, property was pretty inexpensive here. After COVID, or during COVID and after, when everybody was trying to get out of the cities, it skyrocketed. But at the time, you could buy 7 acres off grid, and it wasn't overly expensive. We had that, and then we had just enough money to be able to dry in like a shell of a house. 24 by 40 was the original footprint of the house. And dry in mean like a roof, OSB siding, windows, and that's about it. Hopefully insulation, right? And a wood stove. And so, we started that process, and we were earning from YouTube $200 a month when we moved onto the property. And we had enough money to live for 6 months. And so we thought, man, we've been studying YouTube for years now, in Indonesia, and we thought we could make a business out of this and be able to support ourselves to work with the church here. And so we started, and then it just continued. It continued to grow and continued to grow until we have a full-time income, and we can pay another person full-time off of that, and just showing what it's like to live here, what it's like to build a house, and all of that, and everything that it takes to do all of that.
Right.
So we were able to do that, and then through that, people who were interested in the same thing, right? They find your channel on YouTube and they start watching it, and then what happens is it's kind of like a principle, I guess. It's called know, like, and trust. And so they find you on YouTube through some search or recommended video, and then they get to know you a little bit, right? And hopefully some of them like you, right? Some people don't like you because they just don't like your personality or whatever. They just like anybody in regular life. Yeah. Some people like you, some people don't. But those that like you, they continue to watch. And then hopefully over time they begin to trust you. And from a business side of it, they trust you in maybe what products you recommend or something like that. But on the other side, the spiritual side, is they begin to know, like, and trust you. And then just naturally in videos, we would invite people to come to church, right? Like, it'd be Wednesday and we're filming on Wednesday, but we got to quit early. It's not dark yet, but we're quitting because we're going to go to Bible class. And if you're ever in the area, you're always welcome to come. There's a link down in the description below where you can find all the information that you need. We'd love to see you there. Just like this, simple, right?
Yeah. Just an invitation, really.
Just an invitation. And so people started coming, we started meeting people through that. And some of those people studied and some didn't, but some were baptized, and then some fell away, and others stayed faithful. And, but we were able to start building those relationships with people because they began to know, like, and trust us. And so the thing that when I spoke at Freed about this was that you don't have to be anybody special, right? You don't have to be a preacher. You don't have to be a formal missionary. Anybody can be a disciple maker, right? And I think that's what Jesus expects, is for everybody to strive to fulfill the Great Commission, right? And so looking at that and looking at that anybody can do it, and maybe I talk about that in just a second, but the thing about YouTube is that, it reaches a huge audience, right? Like the potential is there, like over 2.5 billion active monthly users on YouTube. That is a huge audience. That's bigger than any cable network. That's probably bigger than every cable network in the United States ever reaches anytime. And then when you also look at it that, more 18 to 49-year-olds watch YouTube than all cable networks combined, right? And so there's just this opportunity there that is unheard of throughout history. And on top of that, it's free, right? Yeah. And so you have the potential to reach 2.5 billion people. Of course, you won't. A lot of them don't speak your language and things like that. But the potential is there for 2.5 billion people for free. And the equipment that you need, like today, right? We're recording this on an iPhone.
Yeah, that's right.
And the microphones that we're using were less than $100 probably. Right. Yep. And so, everybody has a smartphone pretty much on them, whether it's an Android or an Apple. And for a microphone under $100, you can start producing videos that have the potential to reach millions of people for free again. You've probably heard of the Lord's Way, the TV program with Brother Phil Sanders. Yep. In Search of the Lord's Way. Yeah. And they reach a lot of people through that television program, right? It's great. They have I got some notes here, 210 television markets in the United States, 150 local cable stations, 50 radio stations that they're on. But their budget's $3.5 million a year. Yeah. And that's a great work, right? They need to be commended for that work, and they're reaching an audience that is special, right? That are still TV watchers, right? But all of us have the opportunity to reach that many people through a YouTube channel that we do ourselves, right? And so I was kind of sharing that idea, that concept, that we can share whatever our hobbies are whatever it happens to be, and answer biblical questions for people. Right. And that's going to help us, number one, like whatever the question is, say, should women be preachers, right? Just that's the question we're going to answer in a video. Yeah. Well, first of all, we're going to have to study that question for ourselves, right? And we're going to know the answer when somebody in real life asks us that question, right? Or somebody brings it up, in a Bible class or something, and we will have an answer for it. But then we get to help other people by answering that question on YouTube for them, right? And that's one of the top 100 questions that people ask on the internet about God and the Bible. They want to know, should women be preachers? Because there's a lot of them out there. Sure. And there's 100. I have a list of 100 questions that are the most asked questions on the internet, and you can just start answering those questions in an informal setting. While you're putting the carburetor on a new car, or while you're out there on your bass boat fishing, set the camera up on a tripod just like that, and be like, hey, so I was thinking the other day, should women be preachers? Oh, look at that. There's a big one. Check that guy out, and then continue on with the story, They're watching you do something that they enjoy. Right. Probably, they're watching you because they like bass fishing. Right. And they're also getting an answer to the Bible question. And so they make a connection with you, something that's they have in common. Right. That they have the same kind of hobby or same kind of like, or maybe they're just interested in somebody that's out there fishing. I don't know. Right? Yeah. But whatever drew them to the channel to begin with, but then the spiritual side of that, from someone who, they've been watching for a while, who's answering a Bible question, and thinking about, kind of how to move that forward, as a channel grows or other things like that, you can start taking questions from your viewers, and kind of and let them feed into that, and then that draws them back in as well. That's so right. you have a continued audience in that way. You think so the church in Sandpoint, been here a while. Yep, about 6 years. And so when I think of how there seems to be, and of course I've been watching just from the Facebook side of things, of Sandpoint, there's been baptisms, there's been growth, this, and so what do you see from your vantage point, thinking about the church, things that you'd want to highlight about the church itself, their work in Sandpoint, Idaho, reaching into the community, not just your work, but how do you see the influence of the church in this location? Yeah, I think one of the great things about our congregation is that they are exceptionally welcoming to visitors that come in, and we get quite a few visitors, through different means, but when people come in, they don't get the cold shoulder. Right. It doesn't matter who they are, what they look like, or how they're dressed. They're welcomed in, and people are friendly with them. And I think it's a family, really. Like we do a lot of stuff together outside of the building. We're in each other's homes. People are having Bible studies, and we're active. Yeah. We're active Christians in the community. And so I'd say that is probably one of the best things about the congregation. And that was our experience too, just coming in yesterday, just visiting with the congregation in that way, just you could just step back and see it. And I was talking to Jesse, the preacher, and we were just kind of standing at the back and looking at between class and worship. Oh yeah. And just everybody in the middle just talking. Yeah. It was just a good, I said, that's beautiful right there. Right. That's the church. That's an amazing thing. It's often that we're supposed to end at noon, right? That's the time that we're scheduled to end, right? But it's oftentimes it's 2 o'clock before we're out of the building, right? Because people are just staying, visiting, and talking, Well, and they kind of spontaneously threw a meal together yesterday, kind of last minute, so that people could meet us while we were there. Right. And we left long before everybody else left. There's still people there and visiting, and so it's just a beautiful thing to be able to see that. Yeah. And those are things we always try to highlight. When we do these interviews, we try to highlight what's the church like here in this area. And so I'm gonna turn the flip side of this. Okay. So what would be a struggle for the church in this area? What would be a struggle? What would be a struggle? Leadership. Oh, leadership. Yeah. So from the girls over here, they're like, "Hey, buddy, get it right. It's leadership." Leadership. Yeah, I would say so. Leadership. We don't have an eldership. I don't know that the congregation has ever had an eldership. the way the congregation sits right now, it's a largely a new congregation. As in the building's been there for a long time, but as it is now, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I am the longest running male member in the congregation. I've been here 6 years. So everybody else, all the other men, as far as I know, have been here less than 6 years in this congregation. And so we have some ladies that have been here much longer than that,
Sure.
as in like 20, 30 years or something. But as far as the men go, it's kind of it's almost a new congregation.
Yeah.
And so, but we don't have elders. We have some men that are most likely qualified to be elders. I've taught, through 1 Timothy and through Titus, and then during the summer, Timothy's dad came and he taught on elders. And so there's been a lot of teaching on it, but it's just something that we haven't been able to implement yet. And we might be getting closer now that we've had some men that have been here for a little bit of time to be able to actually know the flock and the flock to get to know them.
And it takes some time
Sure.
for those things to organically develop,
Right.
To get to that point. And the teaching that's done along the way, certainly that's
Sure.
helpful for that. And I know Bob Turner, I think, is coming in
Yep, he's
for a
coming in
leadership
too.
seminar,
Yeah.
and with the Boundary congregation as well, to work together, where Wade Purdom is. And so, there seems to be also a working together of congregations.
Yeah.
That's what I picked up on that
Right.
too. And when I think about leadership, and certainly there's always a need for that. Need strong leadership, obviously need good leaders, so you don't just jump into appointing men just because you need men in place, right?
And so I think that's a danger for sure.
Absolutely, and so that those things certainly take time.
Yeah.
Cindy, I think, has a question
Oh,
behind the camera.
So, just thinking about your Christian walk
Mm-hmm.
and all the story that you've told, when there were times of discouragement
Mm-hmm.
as a family, how did y'all get through it, or was there someone that particularly did something that helped encourage you?
Yeah. So that's a good question. And I was trying to think of that because I knew you were going to ask that question.
You knew it was coming.
I knew it was coming. And we might ask Julie on what if there was anything that she thinks. We have, of course, friends, family, within the church, and all of the normal questions or the normal answers that somebody would give, right? But I think that the real thing comes down to is, when Peter said to Jesus in John 6, right? He says, "Where else am I going to go? Who else will we go to? And where else will we go?"
Yeah.
And it's like, you think about it, like, no matter how bad it gets, what else are you going to do? Where else are you going to go? There is nowhere else, right? There is nothing else to do except to serve the Lord. You know what I mean? And so I think maybe that's what it really kind of comes down to is, and maybe that's the encouragement that all preachers and missionaries and everybody should kind of get, is that what else are you going to do? Right. Maybe you leave that work and you go someplace else, but are you ever, you're going to leave the Lord over some kind of problem? You're going to leave the Lord's church over some kind of problem?
Yeah. Well, and
where else are you going to go?
Instill that in your children,
right?
As they've grown up, because we all go through discouraging times.
Sure.
But if they have that as their base, that's perfect.
Yeah.
I remember too, some of our instructors making the point, to the preaching students, obviously, if there's something else that you can do, go do it. In other words, to instill that commitment to doing this work, and so if you have a passion to go do something else, then go do it. You could be a faithful Christian, go do something else. But if you're going to be in ministry, if you're going to do this work, if you're going to be a missionary, if you're going to be a preacher, if you're going to serve in this type of capacity, it's going to take a commitment.
Yeah.
So I appreciate bringing that back out. And Peter's question, to whom shall we go? That's it, because really there's nothing else.
Yeah.
And having that kind of commitment, I appreciate that answer.
And I think there's another thing that we could kind of pull into there, the parable of the talents.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure.
God has given you this talent, right? This ability to speak, the ability to know His word well enough to teach it, and you're going to go bury it somewhere, right? Like, how's that going to turn out for you?
Follow up.
Yeah.
When do you think that you realized that's it? That's the verse. That's where I'm going to lean when I am discouraged. Can you look back in time and figure out when you got that strength?
Well, I think that the actual verse like came to me when I was thinking about answering this question. You know, like the idea was there. Like, well, what else could we do? You know, like what else? But the actual, like, how am I going to explain that feeling that I had, you know, came thinking about knowing you're going to ask that question and being like, yeah, like
I want to give a Bible answer.
Yeah, you know, but you know what I mean?
Right.
I mean, it was like it was there, but it wasn't really quantified necessarily. You know, it was just it's kind of the automatic response.
Right.
I'm like Peter. I mean, he didn't like sit there and you know contemplate. He's like, what else will we do? You know, who else will I go to?
Hey, John, write this down.
Yeah. You know, but the other part though about the talent, right? The idea about the talents and stuff. I think in preaching school that idea really came in that now, because when I originally went to preaching school, my goal wasn't to be a full-time preacher. My goal was to learn the Word and to understand, you know, what I was taught originally to be baptized, and then really wanting to know the Word. I mean, I was a new babe in Christ, and
just
and
wanted to
didn't
grow.
know. I wanted to grow.
Yeah.
But through that process, you come to find out,
There's a responsibility.
there's a responsibility now, you know, and
right,
so it was wonderful.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, and I think that is part of that growth, and I think that's what we all as teachers, especially, try to instill even in a congregational setting, that idea of growth. You know, it's desire the sincere milk of the Word that you may grow thereby. And we'll, you know, 1 Peter 2:2, we'll toss that in, you know, and we've got to grow in the knowledge. You know, 2 Peter 3:18, if we want to throw the Bible verses in there. But it's trying to instill that type of commitment and responsibility in a membership. That's where you begin to see that growth, you know, and so that's part of that edification that we're trying to instill and trying to help implement into not technically a program, but to instill that principle back into congregations, you know, who are either out there, you know, and just like, why aren't we growing? Why aren't we, you know, getting this done? You know, what is it that we're lacking? And most of the time we need that growth within to step out and to go do the work that we've been called to do, essentially. And so I appreciate that. And thanks for sitting down with us.
Sure.
And we're grateful to you guys for what y'all are doing and for the time that we get to have you follow along with us. And so this is part of, again, the 416 interview series, and we'll see you further down the road.